The 1960s gave us muscle machines, chrome cruisers, and stylish rides that defined an era. But not every car was a masterpiece. From slow and awkward to downright bizarre, we're revisiting the stupidest cars of the decade. Weird, wacky, and wonderfully bad in all the wrong ways. Peel Trident. The Peel Trident was one of the tiniest and strangest cars of the 1960s, a bubble-shaped curiosity on three wheels. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. Its clear dome roof made it look like a toy spaceship, and stepping inside felt like entering a fishbowl. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. This tiny car promised a futuristic city life, where parking was never a problem, and fuel costs were pocket change. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. No trunk, no speed, no safety. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. Yet its memory still defines the decade. The Peel Trident wasn't just a car. It was a snapshot of the 60s obsession with small, strange, and futuristic design. Peel P50. The Peel P50 holds the title of the smallest production car ever made, and it shows. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. This tiny, one-seat, three-wheeled car was barely larger than a chair, with a single door, one headlight, and no reverse gear. It was more than decoration. It was a statement of the time. Designed for quick city trips, it could be parked almost anywhere, even inside an office, as famously demonstrated on TV. The charm was obvious, but so were the problems. Its top speed was just 38 kilometers per hour, and getting caught in traffic felt terrifying. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, yet its memory still defines the decade. The Peel P50 wasn't just transportation. It was the ultimate symbol of 60s microcar madness. Bond Bug. The Bond Bug wasn't just a car. It was a wedge-shaped statement on wheels. Designed in the early 1970s, this tiny three-wheeler came in a blazing tangerine color and looked like it drove straight out of a sci-fi comic book. Imagine seeing one zip by, low-slung, 2 seats, and a canopy that lifted forward like a fighter jet cockpit. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. In a time when British car companies were struggling, the Bond Bug was an optimistic attempt to capture young drivers with something fun, futuristic, and cheap. The charm was obvious. It looked cool, but so were the problems. With limited power and stability, it never became mainstream. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but its memory still defines 70s design daring. Messerschmitt KR200. The Messerschmitt KR200 looked less like a car and more like something from a futuristic cartoon. Built in the 1950s and still spotted in the 60s, this bubble car was a three-wheeled micro machine with seating for two in tandem, like a tiny airplane cockpit on wheels. For families, it was just normal life. But today, it feels strange. Post-war Europe needed affordable transportation, and this was the solution. Lightweight, fuel-efficient, and cheap to build. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A symbol of ingenuity in a time of scarcity. But as the 60s brought bigger, faster cars, the KR200 started looking outdated. It faded away. But its memory still defines the decade, reminding us that necessity once shaped style in ways we can hardly imagine today.
BMW Isetta.
The BMW Isetta was the ultimate bubble car, and it turned heads everywhere it went. With its single front door that swung open like a refrigerator, it looked quirky even by 1950s and 60s standards. This detail says more about the 60s than you might expect. At a time when Europe was still recovering from war, the Isetta was an answer to a very real problem. People needed cheap, fuel-efficient cars. The tiny engine sipped gas, and its compact design made it perfect for crowded cities. The charm was obvious. It was cute, fun, and approachable. But so were the problems. It was cramped, slow, and didn't offer much protection. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. Yet the Isetta remains a symbol of post-war optimism and clever engineering on a shoestring budget.
Heinkel cabine.
The Heinkel cabine was another bubble car that looked like it belonged more on a runway than a highway. Built by a former aircraft manufacturer, it carried that aviation DNA proudly, with its round canopy and lightweight body. To understand the 60s, you can't ignore this curious feature. Like the BMW Isetta, the cabine was designed to get post-war Europe moving again. Small engine, minimal parts, maximum efficiency. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a clever bridge between motorcycles and proper cars. The charm was obvious, tiny, efficient, even stylish. But so were the problems: slow speed, limited comfort, and very little protection. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, a reminder that necessity once pushed design into bold and unusual directions. Gogomobile Dart. The Gogomobile Dart was one of the quirkiest sports cars to ever hit the road. Built in Australia in the late 1950s and cruising into the 60s, this tiny doorless roadster looked like something a kid might draw in the corner of a notebook. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. Australia wanted its own fun, lightweight sports car, and the Dart delivered, with a fiberglass body and a tiny two-stroke engine that made it shockingly nimble. The charm was obvious. It was playful and unique. But so were the problems. It wasn't exactly practical, and its engine struggled to keep up with modern traffic. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but the Dart still stands as a symbol of 60s innovation and pure carefree fun. Reliant Regal 3/25. The Reliant Regal 325 was the quirky British three-wheeler that became a pop culture icon. With its fiberglass body and lightweight frame, it was so small you could practically park it anywhere. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. Back then, this car had a very specific purpose. It was affordable, fuel-efficient, and thanks to its three wheels, cheaper to tax and insure. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a clever solution for working-class mobility. The charm was obvious: cheap motoring for everyone. But so were the problems. Stability issues and limited speed made it the butt of many jokes. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, living on through comedy sketches and nostalgic car shows.
Zundap Janus.
The Zundap Janus might be one of the strangest cars of the 1950s and 60s. With its doors at the front and rear, and seats facing opposite directions, it looked more like a science experiment than a family car. This detail says more about the 60s than you might expect. Built by a motorcycle company, the Janus was meant to be a practical, low-cost people's car. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a bold attempt at rethinking car design entirely. The charm was obvious: unique looks and clever engineering, but so were the problems. Slow speed, awkward handling, and limited appeal meant sales never took off. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace, but the Janus still fascinates car enthusiasts as a symbol of true 60s experimentation. Amphicar 770. The Amphicar 770 wasn't just a car. It was a car and a boat in one. Yes, this quirky vehicle could drive down the road and then splash straight into the water. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a wild dream of the 1960s brought to life. The name 770 came from its ability to hit 7 miles per hour on water and 70 miles per hour on land. Though owners rarely dared to push it that hard, the charm was obvious. Who wouldn't want to drive straight into a lake? But so were the problems. Maintenance was tricky, performance was underwhelming, and the price kept most buyers away. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade. A symbol of when car design wasn't afraid to get a little adventurous or wet.
Velarex 16/350.
The Velarex 16/350 might be the most unusual car of the 1960s because it wasn't made of metal at all. Its body was stretched fabric over a simple steel frame, giving it a look somewhere between a car and a tent on wheels. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. Built in Czechoslovakia, the Velarex was designed as affordable transportation for people who couldn't afford a real car. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a testament to ingenuity under strict post-war economies. The charm was obvious, lightweight, cheap, and economical. But so were the problems. It was fragile, underpowered, and unsafe by modern standards. What was once everywhere has almost vanished without a trace. Yet the Velarex remains a symbol of resourcefulness and survival.
Trojan 200.
The Trojan 200 was Britain's answer to the microcar craze of the late 50s and early 60s. And it looked every bit as quirky as its competitors. With its egg-shaped body and single front opening door, it resembled a cousin of the BMW Isetta. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. The Trojan 200 was meant to deliver cheap, simple transportation to a recovering nation, using a small engine and lightweight construction to keep costs down. The charm was obvious. It was cute, functional, and perfect for short trips. But so were the problems: limited speed, poor stability, and almost no crash protection. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, reminding us of a time when practicality sometimes came in very peculiar packages. Glass Gogomobile. The Glass Gogomobile was a tiny, German-engineered marvel that looked more like a toy than a real car. Its rounded body and minuscule size made it perfect for zipping through crowded European streets. To understand the 60s, you can't ignore this curious feature. Built for practicality, it offered basic, affordable transportation for post-war families while still standing out with its cheerful design. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A symbol of innovation in microcar engineering. The charm was obvious: compact, efficient, and surprisingly nimble. But so were the problems. Limited power and minimal comfort made longer drives an adventure. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade. A reminder that even the tiniest cars could capture the spirit of the era.
FMR TG 500 Tiger.
The FMR TG 500, nicknamed the Tiger, was a tiny sports car that packed a surprising punch for its size. With its sleek, rounded design and 3 wheels, it looked more like a futuristic toy than a serious car. This detail says more about the 60s than you might expect. Built in West Germany, it offered spirited performance in a compact package, giving drivers an affordable taste of sports car excitement. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more: daring, agile, and undeniably quirky. The charm was obvious: fun, fast, and attention-grabbing. But so were the problems. Its 3 wheels made stability tricky, and it never achieved mass-market success. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, a symbol of bold microcar innovation.
Bond Minicar 250.
The Bond Minicar 250 was Britain's tiny, 3-wheeled answer to affordable post-war transportation. With its compact design, curved body, and single front door, it looked more like a scooter with a roof than a proper car. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more: a clever solution for families and workers needing cheap, efficient travel. The charm was obvious: lightweight, economical, and surprisingly nimble. But so were the problems. Limited speed, minimal comfort, and quirky handling made longer trips challenging. For families, it was just normal life. But today, it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, capturing a moment when resourcefulness and creativity drove car design in ways larger manufacturers rarely attempted. Berkeley T60. The Berkeley T60 was a tiny British microcar that looked like it came straight from a cartoon. Its bubble-shaped body, small wheels, and bright colors made it impossible to miss on the roads of the early 1960s. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. Built for fun as much as function, the T60 was designed to give post-war drivers an affordable, cheerful ride, often powered by a modest two-stroke engine. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A playful experiment in lightweight car design. The charm was obvious, cute, efficient, and eye-catching. But so were the problems. Limited performance and short range kept it from mainstream success. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, a tiny icon of British creativity. Scooter. The scooter was a quirky British microcar that looked like a scooter with a roof. Tiny and three-wheeled, it could slip through narrow streets like nothing else on the road. The charm was obvious, small, economical, and surprisingly nimble. But so were the problems. Limited speed, cramped interior, and minimal protection made it a challenging ride. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A bold statement of post-war ingenuity and fun. For families, it was just normal life. But today, it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, reminding us that creativity often thrived where resources were scarce, and that sometimes the smallest cars left the biggest impressions. Felber Autoroller. The Felber Autoroller was an Austrian microcar that looked more like a tiny toy than a real vehicle. With its rounded, minimalist design and small three-wheeled frame, it captured the imagination of post-war Europe. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a clever attempt to provide affordable mobility during a time of recovery and limited resources. The charm was obvious. Light, economical, and uniquely stylish. But so were the problems. Limited speed, cramped space, and delicate construction kept it from mainstream success. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. It faded away, but its memory still defines the era, a symbol of ingenuity, whimsy, and the determination to make even the tiniest car feel like an adventure. Romech Lawrence. The Romech Lawrence was a rare German microcar that looked like a sleek, tiny luxury cruiser. With its elongated body, unusual styling, and hand-built construction, it was anything but ordinary. The charm was obvious, stylish, elegant, and unique. But so were the problems. Limited production, high costs, and modest performance kept it out of the mainstream. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A statement of ambition and artistry in an era of small, economical cars. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade. A reminder that even in the world of microcars, vision and flair could leave an unforgettable mark. Fiat 600 Multipla. The Fiat 600 Multipla was a tiny Italian family car that redefined what a compact vehicle could do. With its short, rounded body and three-row seating, it looked cramped from the outside, but surprisingly spacious inside. Behind the style was a hidden story about the decade itself. Designed to carry more passengers efficiently in post-war cities, it prioritized practicality without sacrificing charm. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A clever solution for families, offering flexibility and accessibility. The charm was obvious, efficient, economical, and friendly. But so were the problems. Modest power and tight quarters made long trips a challenge. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade. A symbol of smart, compact, everyday innovation. BMW 700. The BMW 700 was a tiny German car that surprised everyone with its performance packed into a compact frame. With its rounded, cheerful design and nimble handling. It looked friendly, almost toy-like, yet drove with unexpected liveliness. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a symbol of BMW's post-war ambition to create affordable, sporty cars for everyday drivers. The charm was obvious, efficient, agile, and full of character. But so were the problems. Limited space and modest power kept it from being a full family car. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, reminding us that even small cars could carry personality, innovation, and the thrill of driving all in one neat package. Saab Sonett 1. The Saab Sonett I was a Swedish microcar that looked like a futuristic speedster in a time of practical family vehicles. Its low, sleek profile and bubble-like canopy made it feel more like a concept car than something you could drive on everyday streets. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. An experiment in lightweight engineering and aerodynamic design. The charm was obvious, sporty, unique, and daring. But so were the problems. Limited power, tiny interior, and challenging handling kept it from mass appeal. For families, it was just normal life. But today, it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, capturing a moment when innovation and style trumped.
Messerschmitt FMR 500.
The Messerschmitt FMR 500 was a tiny, three-wheeled marvel that looked more like a fighter jet than a car, reflecting its designer's aviation background. Its bubble canopy and narrow frame made it stand out instantly on the streets of the 1960s. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more. A bold experiment in lightweight, aerodynamic transport for post-war Europe. The charm was obvious, nimble, efficient, and unmistakably unique. But so were the problems. Cramped space, tricky handling, and limited comfort kept it from widespread adoption. For families, it was just normal life, but today it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, a symbol of daring design and microcar ingenuity that few dared to replicate.
NSU Prinz 4.
The N.S. Prinz 4 was a small German car that proved compact vehicles could still be practical and stylish. Its rounded body and modest size made it perfect for city streets, yet it carried a surprisingly roomy interior for its class. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a reflection of post-war efficiency and clever engineering. The charm was obvious, economical, reliable, and approachable. But so were the problems. Limited speed and modest comfort meant it wasn't ideal for long journeys. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, reminding us that even the smallest cars could leave a lasting impression.
Auto Bianchi Bianchina.
The Auto Bianchi Bianchina was a tiny Italian city car that radiated charm with its compact, rounded body and cheerful design. Its small size made it perfect for narrow streets, yet it offered a surprisingly comfortable interior for short trips. At first glance, it looked practical. In reality, it was much more, a symbol of Italy's post-war creativity, blending style, efficiency, and personality in one petite package. The charm was obvious, cute, nimble, and full of character. But so were the problems. Modest power, limited space, and basic comfort kept it from long-distance travel. For families, it was just normal life. But today it feels strange. It faded away, but its memory still defines the decade, a testament to playful, functional, and stylish small cars. Thanks for joining this wild ride through the 1960s. Subscribe and stay tuned for the next adventure you definitely won't want to miss.